Welcome to Pharmacy View podcast, where we provide regular interviews with pharmacists and key people within the Australian pharmacy and associated industry. In this stream of podcast episodes, we discuss aspects of technology or business operation and how each area interacts with guests' current role or pharmacy-related business. I'm your host, Scott Carpenter, and my guest today is proudly brought to you by Shopfront Solutions for all your digital, shelf and marketing needs, part of the Arian Technologies Group.
I think it's a really exciting time to be in pharmacy as well because of what's happened during COVID. The government as well as the consumer can see the opportunity with pharmacy, and they look at it in a different way as well. You know, we weren't doing vaccinations that long ago, and now it's commonplace to get your vaccinations at pharmacy, and most people do it. So from that point of view, it's exciting, and it's exciting. I think it's great for the industry to have enthusiastic young pharmacists, and it's really what we needed. And with the expanded scope of professional services and things like that, it's an exciting time to be part of the industry. So I think it's exactly what we needed, and I think it's fantastic for these younger pharmacists that they've got that enthusiasm and they're really going to take it to the next level, which is awesome.
Welcome back today, Natalie Sirianni, Pharmacy and Health Business Broker at Attain. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Scott. Great to be here again.
I look forward to it. It's like one of the things I guess through my pharmacy career and journey is that whilst we've attended a lot of conferences together, I always seem to pop into yourself and your dad, Frank, at strange places around the countryside, and I always enjoy your interactions. So when the chance to have a chat with you again today came up, I thought it would be great to see and chat with you again. So I look forward to our ongoing association. So before we get into the meat of today's topic, which is 60-day dispensing and the 8 CPA negotiations or sign-off, for anyone that may not have come across you or may not know you, who is Natalie, who is Attain, and what's your association with the pharmacy industry?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I better into that straight away. And thanks again for having me again on, Scott. It's always great to chat. And like you said, we always seem to run into each other at the pharmacy conferences, which are a great place to meet and catch up, but good to have a more in-depth chat. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Natalie Sirianni. I am a pharmacy business broker, as Scott mentioned, and my company is called Attain Business Broking. So I got into pharmacy quite young because my father, Frank Sirianni, has been around for over 40 years now in the pharmacy industry, and I wanted a job straight out of school, so I started working with him at Medici Capital doing pharmacy valuations, and then I moved into brokerage about 12 years ago now. So we sell pharmacies throughout Australia, and often, majority of the time, we're representing the vendor or the owner of the business to sell their business, and we specialise in pharmacy. So we do other health practices as well, but majority of our work is in the pharmacy space, and obviously very impacted by particularly what we're going to talk about today, 60-day dispensing and 8 CPA. Those factors have a big impact on the market, but really enjoy working with pharmacy owners throughout Australia and pharmacy buyers on their journey to finding the right business. And we also run events to train up particularly young pharmacists the process at how to go about buying a pharmacy, and also provide market updates and things like that for people within the industry so that everyone can have a really good feel for what's happening out there in the market.
Okay, and look, again, if I can digress slightly for a second, is that I'm, as I've mentioned a couple of times, towards the end of my career and the end of my time in pharmacy, but I've met and have associations with hundreds, if not thousands, of great people from within the Australian pharmacy industry. But from your business perspective, I think one of the things that's always intrigued me is the cycle in terms of pharmacy valuations and buying and selling that seems to be relative to agreements and funding and money, and I guess to a big extent valuations that the banks would then lend on. That's really the history here, isn't it, or the journey that you go through. There'll be peak times and quiet times. Can you talk a little bit about what that's looked like?
Yeah, definitely. Spot on. You've hit the nail on the head there, Scott. And I think any industry goes through it. If you look at the housing market or share market, stock market, or any kind of investing tool or strategy, they go through cycles. The difference we have in pharmacy is we've got overlaid with this the government agreements, so the community pharmacy agreements between the Pharmacy Guild of Australia and the federal government here in Australia. And because of that, we have economic conditions which factor into the cycle, and then we've also got the timing around the community pharmacy agreements. So there's things like interest rates, there's things like banks' appetite for lending to both businesses in general, but also pharmacy specifically. Then you have workforce issues that we see in pharmacy, which are impacted by a number of factors, such as immigration rates, graduation rates at universities, who's often offers pharmacy courses. All those factors come into it. And then on top of those economic conditions, you've got this community pharmacy agreement, which have been 5-year agreements. The first one commenced in 1990. So as Scott mentioned earlier, we've just signed the 8th CPA. But those 5-year agreements, what you find is that generally speaking, as we get to the end of the agreement, the Guild and the government start negotiating, and there becomes a little bit of uncertainty in the market. So people get a bit concerned about what the future may hold because of that uncertainty. And so we see the market being impacted significantly in terms of supply and demand and things like that, which I'll go into later on, no doubt, in terms of how they're specifically impacted. But that 5-year cycle, combined with all the other economic factors, really mean it's an interesting time for us and very cyclical as well.
Yeah, it's fair to say, and again, I'm going to call on some of my experience and history here, that pharmacy, from a financial institution, banking, lending point of view, pharmacy is still a strong place for finance and banks to be involved with. Like, they're not scared at all in terms of pharmacy compared to other industries?
Yeah, very much so, Scott. So I think, we're very lucky working in the pharmacy industry because we have that certainty around the community pharmacy agreements. But what we found is, as of late, with COVID, the strength of pharmacy versus a lot of other small to medium-sized businesses was very, very obvious, because in those economic downturns or, the pandemic, the 1-in-100-year type event, you can see that pharmacy maintained good performance throughout, purely from a financial point of view, if you're looking at it how the banks look at it. And because of that, it showed what a solid industry it was and the relatively low risks compared to other businesses out there that are that small to medium-sized business. So because of that, the banks get a lot of confidence, and then they have confidence in lending to pharmacy and providing that those funds towards pharmacy. So particularly since COVID, the appetite for banks has been very strong towards pharmacy. We had the event of 60-day dispensing come in last year, which we'll discuss in this podcast as well, and that was certainly a bit of a glitch in terms of the confidence from the banks. But overall, since COVID, we've seen very positive appetites from banks towards lending to pharmacy. And the reason is because not just COVID, but historically, pharmacy businesses maintain fairly solid results, even in economic downturns.
Times, yeah. And look, again, you and I last saw each other in person at a conference in Adelaide. I think it was about October last year from memory, and I think that was just as 60-day dispensing was about to hit, or it had just hit. So what's the impact been like from your perspective?
Yeah, it was a very interesting year last year, Scott. So I was probably a bit stressed when I saw you at that time in October. But what we found is it was first announced in October last year. So October 2023 was when the announcement came. And then the 60-day dispensing actually commenced on 1st of September 2023. So what we found is that like most government legislation that's changed, when the shock first came through of the announcement, and it was a shock to pharmacy, there was a bit of panic in the industry and particularly in the market. And everyone, I wouldn't say overreacted, but was looking at the numbers and it looked concerning. It looked very, very concerning. And because of that, there was a lot of fear in the market, particularly for young buyers who are looking to buy their first pharmacy. It's a lot of money that you have to put up to buy a pharmacy business, and to put in that kind of capital outlay and take on that risk was concerning with the uncertainty around 60-day dispensing. And if you looked at the numbers, the impact could have been quite significant for many, many pharmacies. And so the fear was there, the uncertainty was there, and therefore what we found is that market confidence reduced significantly. And we run a market sentiment report 3 times a year, which is a survey of pharmacists throughout Australia, and you could see the data just plummeted in terms of the confidence that we were seeing in the market. So when it first got announced, that was what the impact was. As 60-day was implemented about in September when it was first implemented, we started to see the scripts come through. And what we found is that once we could see what the numbers were, the market regained a bit of confidence because it was quantifiable and we could see the numbers. So we could see what the impact was. In many pharmacies, it wasn't great, but you could see that impact and then you could quantify it, and you had the confidence knowing that, okay, this is what the impact is now, this is what we think the impact will be, and therefore we can make decisions and move forward. But until the time of having those numbers, it was very low confidence, and people didn't really want to make the leap to put in those capital investments, and business owners weren't looking to invest a huge amount of money because there was the concern about what was going to happen. So while the impact was certainly negative on pharmacy performance with the 60-day dispensing coming in, once you could quantify it and see what it was, then at least the banks knew what we were dealing with, accountants, valuers, all those financial advisors throughout the industry could see what the impact was, and then we could actually assess it.
From that perspective, and I guess we've just finished the financial year from a tax perspective and the P&L perspective. So is this a P&L is going to give us a true indication, or is that still kind of mixed because it's a half or a part year?
Yeah, so the way it came in, it was a tranche approach that the government did in the end. Initially, they were saying it was going to be all at once, and then it was a tranche approach. So we had the first tranche in September, then March. And so it's going to be hard to ascertain exactly what the impact is from the full financial year results, but it certainly helps to have those numbers because we'll be able to see what's going on. And then there were some other payments like rural pharmacies. The government announced a regional pharmacy transition allowance and things like that, which is now stopped. So there are some other payments going through that will no longer be there and things like that. Okay. So it's a bit messy, I would say, the financials at the moment, but certainly having the full year will give us an indication of where we're heading and how it's impacting.
Yeah, from an individual business perspective, you've got a 12-month history now with as many changes and variables as other years. Maybe this one's a bit more significant, but let's face it, when's there been a normal year in recent times?
That's exactly right. And you would know, Scott, the amount of years you've been in pharmacy, I think there's been no period where it's been nothing going on, no changes. There's always something going on, whether it's specific to pharmacy or more widely the economy, but there's always something happening. And I think, particularly when we deal with pharmacy owners that have been owners for 30, 40 years, it's always nice to speak to them and get that kind of perspective. And even, again, when I speak to my father, you always get that perspective of it's okay, we've been through this before. Yes, it's going to be more tough than it was in the past, but that's always the case with any industry you're looking at the moment.
Yeah, I hope you don't get too many associates saying, I remember when.
Yeah, we get that a lot. It's a good thing, though.
It is. And look, it's I again, just digressing slightly. I just put a little tongue-in-cheek post up on my Facebook page. It's a private page, so no one's going to be able to find it. But I'm helping a mate out at the moment doing a bit of delivery driving around in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. 1 or 2 days a week just to help him out in the short term. And I've probably driven more in recent times than I have in the last several years. And talking about change, I remember when a red light meant that you stopped. Okay. I remember when an orange light said the lights are about to change to red. And let me tell you, that has all changed these days. And I guess it's no different in any business or industry or life at the moment, is that what was normal some years ago is not anymore. So now, I noticed with some of the numbers that are on the Pharmacy Guild website around the HCPA that there's $2.11 billion for new fees associated to 60 days dispensing. So that's money that's yet to come in terms of the future, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So with the 8 CPA, what they've done now is they've added on an additional AHI payment to the 60-day scripts. So what that means is there's additional compensation for the 60-day scripts, not additional compared to what it was prior to 60-day announcement, but additional to what people were getting prior to 1st of April, which is when this payment will be starting from. The payments are going to come in the future, but they're going to back pay it for scripts from 1st of April. So because of that, we're now seeing additional funding coming through on those 60-day dispensing scripts. So the impact to each pharmacy won't be as great as what was initially expected, because they're getting that additional AHI, which is $4.79 per 60-day script.
Yeah, cool. That's cool. Was there anything around anything else around 60-day dispensing that we wanted to chat about, or has that covered most of it?
I think that's covered most of it, probably. Yeah. Anything else in particular that?
No, that's cool, and it's good from that perspective, because I think that leads nicely into, I guess, the gist of this chat was obviously around the 8 CPA. So from your perspective, now, and I know I watched the webinar from yourself and your dad a week or so ago. So from your perspective, what does 8 CPA look like for you guys?
So realistically, the 8 CPA is a great outcome for pharmacy, and a great credit to the Guild for their negotiation with the government in very difficult times. I think the economic times right now make it very difficult to negotiate anything with the government. So they've done a fantastic job for what I think is a great agreement for both pharmacy and the consumer as well. It really provides a lot of benefit. So in terms of funding, we're seeing increased funding across the 8 CPA, so $4.88 billion in additional funding compared to what was the 7th CPA. Then we're seeing that indexation of the AHI, and we're also seeing that additional AHI for 60-day scripts. The other thing that we're seeing is that the regional pharmacy transition allowance that I mentioned earlier, that has been scrapped, but we are getting additional payments in the regional pharmacy maintenance allowance. So regional pharmacies will get additional funding compared to the 7th CPA, but they're not getting that transitional allowance that was in there that the government announced as a reaction to 60-day dispensing. And the other thing is we're seeing additional funding. I think it's a 30% increase for community pharmacy programs such as DAAs and things like that. So from my point of view, the biggest thing from a market point of view as to what's great about the 8 CPA is it provides certainty for the next 5 years. And the key thing is that we didn't have that when we had 60-day dispensing, because we didn't know the impact. We didn't know how it was going to happen. The government essentially came in during a CPA and announced this, so there was a lot of uncertainty around it. With the ACPA being signed, we now have that certainty that we needed from an industry point of view, from a market point of view, but really critical. We talked about the banks earlier. A key part of banks being having a good appetite to lend to pharmacy is because of the certainty associated with that. And when that certainty went out the window with the announcement of 60-day dispensing, puts a lot of pressure on the system, and I don't think the government factored in any of that in their thinking at all. So the certainty that comes with an 8 CPA is very, very positive from a market point of view, but also, like I said, banks, accountants, valuers, the whole ecosystem from a financial point of view is really, really good, and it provides a certainty for pharmacy owners. So even if they're not looking to sell, if they're looking to invest, such as buy a robot or get some more staff or invest in their team for training and things like that, they know what the future will look like. And with 60 days getting announced prior to that, they didn't have that. So I think it put a lot of fear and uncertainty in the minds of pharmacy owners and employees throughout Australia. And so to get that locked in with the 8 CPA is really, really positive for the industry as a whole, and certainly for the market and a financial point of view as well. And I think from my point of view, the CPA provides the certainty that we need and provides a fair remuneration to the pharmacy owners so they continue to provide the services, and also putting the money where the services are really valued by the community as well. So I think that's been a really good outcome, and not just, you know, it covers off 60-day dispensing. I think it looks good from a whole, from providing the outcomes we want from the PBS, really.
Yeah, so confidence is high again, which is great to hear. So what does that mean from a buyer, seller, hang on to my pharmacy perspective? Because if you've got a reasonably good turnover business, all of a sudden your remuneration for that business is looking good for the next 12 months, isn't it? So do you let that sit for 12 months, get a truer P&L, cash flow status, or, I guess coming back to what does it look like from a buying, selling perspective now?
Yeah, so really interesting. We got, I think the announcement was on a Monday about the 8 CPA being just signed. We got a bit of an update on the Monday afternoon as to what was in it. And from Tuesday, my phone started ringing with buyers who are saying, I'm back in the market, I want to buy. We can see the confidence is there, and so we're happy and satisfied with what's there, that we feel that we can make that investment, and we're not so concerned about the risk. So straight away we saw the confidence increase, and we saw those buyers coming back into the market that had pulled out because of 60-day dispensing. From a seller point of view, it's a really interesting point that you make, because the confidence is still there. So often they could say, well, we don't want to sell now because we've got certainty there. But what we're finding is that because during the calendar year 2023, the transaction volume of pharmacy selling was a lot lower than usual because of the uncertainty around 60-day dispensing. So we were still seeing some transactions, but transaction volume was down significantly. So all those older owners, a lot of them were exhausted post-COVID, because we all know the extra workload and stress that was associated with pharmacies being open, particularly in the lockdown areas throughout COVID. They didn't stop working. They had to deal with, a lot of them had two teams, A and B, so they could cover off if someone got COVID and everything like that. The stress from the customers, the stress of the team, there was so much additional pressures. And what we found is that a lot of people went, okay, we're through COVID now, I'll sell in the next year or two. And then 60 days got announced and they went, oh shit, I can't sell now with all this uncertainty. Sorry, excuse my language. And then what we found is that those people now are coming and saying, look, I'm exhausted. I've had enough. It's too much for me right now. So we've got the certainty around the 8 CPA, so I'm looking to get out. And because we've just passed 30 June, a lot of them will probably wait for their 30 June figures, and that's the feedback we're getting at the moment. We're getting a lot of potential sellers call us and say, once we have our 30 June figures, we're keen to sell. So it'll be a bit of a catch-up from the market for the transactions we didn't have last year. And then what we find is that those buyers that get into vendors that are getting to retirement age will then start to list later this year. And we'll find that usually for the CPA, the first 3 or so years are pretty steady. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, as we come to the closer to the 5-year period, the guilds start negotiating with the government, and transaction volume pulls back a little bit. So we expect it's going to be pretty busy for the next year or so as we catch up on that transaction volume. And like you said, some owners will probably hold off a bit longer because the 8 CPA provides them the certainty as well. But there's a fair few owners that are at that retirement age and probably would have wanted to do it 12 months ago and have had to hang on for another 12 months because of the 60-day dispensing.
Yeah, and I guess again, from a financial point of view, as I said, we've got a financial year end now, which is 30th of June. They could be talking to you now, and by the time you get everything organised and all the information, it's July's over, for example. And so you've now got at least 1 month's financials from the new year. And then, and again, I've been through this before on several occasions, the time that it takes to actually get a transaction happening, it could almost be a full quarters of information before we kind of finally sign on the dotted line. But that's the level of confidence that could be out there now, isn't it? Is that if I'm half thinking of selling, it's just the indication that I'm thinking about it and how do we go about this, because this isn't going to happen in the next week. It's going to happen over the next couple of months. And yes, you can put a number on things, but again, as I know, it also comes back down to what the banks think about the valuation as well. So, and that was going to be my next question. So does this, from a broker and a bank's valuation point of view, does the 8th CPA make pharmacies more valuable than they were, or it's still just averaged out over the period of time?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's a question that pretty much all owners are calling to ask us to say, well, am I going to get more for my business now? What I would say is we're probably returning to a pre-60-day valuation or price. So we had the impact last year where the transaction volume went down quite significantly, and generally speaking, last year, if the businesses that were selling were businesses that were very strong financially, and those that were perhaps less attractive to the market or less strong financially or significantly impacted by the 60-day dispensing, we were finding that those owners weren't selling because the offers they were getting were not up to the level that they wanted, and they had a bit more optimistic view as to how 60 days would play out. Then the buyers were looking at those businesses. So those businesses didn't transact. The businesses that did transact were the results were quite good for the transactions that actually went place. But again, the transaction volume was down significantly. So the data, if you look at the data through 60-day dispensing, it actually looks okay despite the huge plummet in confidence that we saw through that time. What we're seeing now is that because of the pharmacy valuers many of them were adjusting out income or net profit relating to their perceived impact of 60-day dispensing based on what the calculators were saying. So each pharmacy could do a calculator to see what their potential loss was from 60-day dispensing. And so the valuers were looking at that and seeing the impacts of that and accounting for it in their values during that period. Now what we see is the valuers then looking at, okay, well, what's the income associated with the 8 CPA that will account for that loss that we're getting on 60-day dispensing. So I would say overall we're expecting that prices are going to return to pre-60-day levels, and across the board you're going to see much more confidence. Those businesses that didn't sell last year, they'll probably get offers a lot easier now just because that confidence there. We don't expect that they're going to see a huge increase in pharmacy values or prices, but like I said, returning to what they were pre-60 days, and a lot more transactions going through, probably quicker offers, and we've already noticed that with a few of the businesses that we've either had on the market or just come to market post the announcement of 8 CPA. The offers are coming in quicker, so there's a lot more movement and shorter time on market as well.
Yeah, and so in terms of that, and this is probably a question without notice, because I've just been pondering as we've been chatting, is shopping centre versus strip shop, CBD versus regional businesses. Is there a hot spot at the moment, or is there different people looking for different businesses?
Yeah, so definitely shopping centre pharmacies as of late have been concerning for some buyers, and it's always been just because the rent percentage is a lot higher, and particularly with shopping centres, a lot of the larger shopping centres have very high rent increases from year to year. So there will be some buyers that stay away from them altogether and don't want to touch them. But there are some buyers that do very well in shopping centres, so they specifically target those kind of businesses. But I would say on the main, historically, strip or smaller community shopping centre pharmacies, there's more demand for those versus the larger shopping centres because you have to be a lot more specialised and have really good experience in terms of dealing with landlords and things like that, which a lot of pharmacy owners don't have that expertise and are not taught it in uni or anything like that. So because of that, we see a real push towards strip and smaller community shopping centre pharmacies. In terms of metro versus rural, what we found is that over the last, I would say, 5 years, there's been a real push to rural locations because there's a few factors in there, but generally speaking, the returns are a bit better in rural locations in terms of the returns that you're getting on the business. But also you're seeing a lot of people see rural as a great place where they can add value to the community as well. And so there's a push to be able to provide a real service focus. And from a pharmacist role point of view, a professional satisfaction, you're often seeing higher levels in rural because you can provide a much broader service as well. So some people will automatically go to rural, some people automatically go to metro. What we did see during COVID is the CBD pharmacies suffered significantly because of the lack of workforce that were in the CBDs, and that's now rebounded post-COVID, but that was definitely an impact during COVID. They were significantly impacted.
Yeah, and again, from my perspective, certainly pre-COVID, it was hip to actually live and work in the city. And sometimes the poor old regional areas suffered as a result of that. Since COVID, it's actually kind of hip and cool to live in the regional areas. It's a great lifestyle. There's some big, country cities, regional cities that have great facilities and great schools as well. And I know that's always been a bit of a dilemma for pharmacists, because it's okay if you've got a young family, but the minute they need to go to high school or college, that was when they tended to then sell the regional pharmacies and move back to the city. But I think that seems to have inverted from my perspective anyway. So,
that's really important. No, that's right. I was just going to say that's really important from a workforce point of view as well, because historically it was difficult to get pharmacists in those rural locations. And so having that movement of population there, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, from that perspective. And I would never ask you to breach confidentiality, that. So I'll preface this this question by saying that. But is there still individual pharmacists looking to buy? Is there still groups of pharmacists that work together, looking to buy?
Yeah, it's a real mix. What we found during the times of COVID, a lot of the larger operators that had multiple pharmacies were expanding, and the reason they were expanding is because they had the teams behind them to be able to do that. Whereas individual operators through COVID, if you're an owner-operator of your business and you got one pharmacy, you were so focused on the business during that time, the stress with the teams, the patients, all the changes of legislation, everything that was going through during COVID, e-scripts and everything coming up, they had their hands full. And so they couldn't even put the mindset time towards buying another pharmacy. It just wasn't possible. Then as we came out of COVID, what we found is those owners were then more focused on the business and the future, and a lot of them look to, if they're single operators, get their second pharmacy or their third pharmacy. But we do still see the groups there that are, groups of pharmacists coming together to then expand and, have economies of scale through head office and stuff like that. They're still buying for sure, but we are seeing those one or two pharmacy owners come back to the market post-COVID because they actually have the mental capacity and time to be able to do it. So from that point of view, we're seeing much more balance than we did during COVID.
Yeah, and again, my last question is probably around there's always been trend's probably not quite the right word, but I call it the mature age pharmacist. Or these days I use heritage. I'm not old. I have heritage. So heritage pharmacists that would take in younger pharmacists with a bit of a succession plan. So is that still happening in the marketplace?
Yeah, very much so. And I personally think it's a really great way to work in pharmacy, because what it does is it provides the young incoming junior partner, they can get knowledge and know-how and understanding for how the business works, financial sides, how to pay taxes, all those things that you don't know before you become an owner. They get all that mentorship and knowledge, but then also the senior pharmacist, or the one who's stepping back, the heritage one, as you mentioned, they get the energy and enthusiasm of the younger pharmacist coming in. So we find that partnerships work really, really well in a pharmacy setting, and we're finding it's very prevalent at the moment where people can find a junior partner. So it can be difficult to find the right person or the right mix. And realistically, the financial side you can work out. It's about getting someone you can work together with and have the same values and goals and outcomes that you're looking for out of the business. So it can be difficult to find the right person, but we find it works really, really well in pharmacy, and we're seeing a lot of that happen at the moment. And it's great for the transition of the industry as well. From that generational point of view, getting the young blood through as owners is really important to the future of the industry, and having them as owners so they've got a real stake in the business and are engaged and enthusiastic, it works really, really well. So from our point of view, that's a great part of the industry and really important that it does continue. And we're seeing a lot of the pharmacies we're selling at the moment are we're either doing partnership facilitations for them, or the people that are buying it have someone that's coming in with who can invest the money and the financial know-how, and then someone as well that's going to bring in the energy and things like that. So it's a really good way to do it.
Yeah, and Natalie, I'm sure you've seen this as well. I get the opportunity to look at the industry from the outside these days, and not working specifically in it. And one of the biggest changes that I've seen in the last probably 12 to 18 months, and I've seen it specifically through many of the guests here on our podcast series, is that there's a new level of enthusiasm from a new level of pharmacists. And I know COVID destroyed many of us. I know everyone got overworked, family health, mental health issues. But certainly in the last 12 months, there's a level of, I call it youthful enthusiasm in pharmacists that I don't think I've seen for a while. And I don't think we're specifically targeting here on the podcast. It's just these people want to tell their story. And for anyone that hasn't listened to some of the recent episodes, there's some great stories out there from young pharmacists about what they're doing and what they're up to, and it's worth a listen from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's a really exciting time to be in pharmacy as well because of what's happened during COVID. The government as well as the consumer can see the opportunity with pharmacy, and they look at it in a different way as well. We weren't doing vaccinations that long ago, and now it's commonplace to get your vaccinations at pharmacy, and most people do it. So from that point of view, it's exciting, and it's exciting. I think it's great for the industry to have enthusiastic young pharmacists, and it's really what we needed. And with the expanded scope of professional services and things like that, it's an exciting time to be part of the industry. So I think it's exactly what we needed, and I think it's fantastic for these younger pharmacists that they've got that enthusiasm and they're really going to take it to the next level, which is awesome.
That's great. So, Natalie, it's been great to chat. We're coming to the end of our time. Was there anything else on your list that we haven't covered off?
No, I think that was everything that I had in my mind. And I think, the key thing, obviously, the 8 CPA, the Guild have done a great job to get a good, solid agreement that provides us with certainty. And, for anyone that's looking to buy or sell, definitely now's the time to start thinking about it because, as you mentioned, Scott, it's not a quick process and we're finding it's taking longer and longer. So if you are thinking about it, make sure you get on it earlier rather than later and reach out to financial advisors to make sure you understand what's going on in the current market so that you make educated decisions.
Around that. Okay. Nat, as always, it's been great to chat. Thanks for your time today, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening today. Pharmacy View is a technology-focused podcast provided by Melbourne-based business Arian Technologies and Shopfront Solutions. Over the podcast series, our guests include pharmacists, retail managers, wholesalers, suppliers, and industry technology partners. If you would like further information on our podcast series or to participate in one of our episodes, feel free to send me a message or touch base through the Pharmacy View website, pharmacyview.com.au.